Now, when most of us think of classic horror games, we usually start in the mid-90s, quite a ways into gaming history, actually. Titles like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Alone in the Dark. Alone in the Dark. We might already know our Halloween or The Shining, but I want to go back further to see if I can find gaming's Nosferatu. Ooh. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. I have a trash addiction. Psycho Killer was an early adopter of the FMV train, hitting the Amiga CD-TV in 1992, the same year that games like Night Trap opened the floodgates on the gimmick. Developed by Delta 4 Interactive and published by Online Entertainment, Psycho Killer is basically a slasher B, or maybe C, movie with an interactive spin. First off, just getting this thing to run was strangely roundabout. Amiga CD-TV emulators are non-existent as far as I can tell, so this is the game's only port for DOS. And boy, there must have been some finagling to get this working on a DOS machine. See, trying to run it straight through DOSBox gives you an error telling you need to mount it. I'm sure there's a way to do this manually, but the good people at My Abandonware just included a copy of DOSBox with an autoexec file to do it for me. It's weird running a DOS game through File Explorer, but whatever. Alright, what was all this trouble for? This is certainly a title screen. The tutorial tells you everything you need to know to play. Click the arrows to move, click on items to pick them up, click on things to interact. Easy enough.
Well done. Well done. Well done. Well done.
Let's launch into the game proper then. There's a spooky series of freeze frames serving as credits, because this is real cinema. Our setup: a woman gets in her car, drives, and meets the titular Psycho Killer. There's a guy killing people in the countryside, and got it.
October was cold. The sun brought light but no warmth, and an east wind chilled the countryside. I was driving along a quiet country lane. Suddenly, from a brief patch of mist, a car loomed up ahead of me, completely blocking the road. I had to stab quickly at the brakes.
Well done.
No, my name is carved in stone. The ground is my eternal home.
What? Wait, did I have to do something there? Was I supposed to click on the brake? There wasn't any kind of indicator that I had control? What was that little death poem? Is the narrator a ghost? This is the worst jazz I've heard in a long time. And I've played jazz. Yep, the game will, without warning, put you in do-or-die situations where you just have to figure out the right place to click. There's also no saving. Failing one of these sections means a restart, and you have to watch the opening sequence every time.
Stupid place to leave a car blocking the road like that. Oh, sugar. What is this? She's obviously in trouble. How can I help her?
Yeah, the writing is not great.
Sugar! It's him! Eat my Reeboks, freak face.
Well done.
Everything about this game is stiff and uncomfortable. There's no feedback on anything you do. When you click an arrow to move, everything freezes for a few seconds as it just starts huffing to load the next still image. It's especially bad for the actual video clips. So they obviously filmed each of these shots as separate video files, but they were either unaware of or didn't have access to an editing software that would let them place sequential shots together into a single video. So every scene that's made up of multiple shots has these awkward pauses as it loads up the next one.
I saw him coming down the steps towards me. I knew what I had to do. I leapt from the platform, across the track, and scrambled up into the trees. Reaching the top of the rise, I came to a small lake. There was somebody over there, straight ahead of me across the lake.
It doesn't help that many of the screens are either reused or otherwise have little logical consistency with the one near them. The game is astonishingly short. A full playthrough will take you about 10 minutes, and it is consistently underwhelming. This would have been a neat student project, but selling it for money is...
He had something in his hand. It was a petrol bomb. Sugar! It's him! I showed him. Oh, he's dropped his machete.
Time for a change of style. Morgan? Yes? Are you too weak to kill? No.
Delta 4 might ring a bell with some viewers, as their best-known title is the infamous The Town with No Name. In fact, they share some of the same executive staff. This would also be Delta 4's last game, but Psycho Killer's director of photography, Fergus McNeill, would go on to be a lead designer on games like Carmageddon. He's also responsible for programming Mind Fighter. Let's rewind a few years to 1989 and take a look at the last half of Darkness. This is an adventure game set in the backwoods of New Orleans, where the player's aunt, whom the README describes as a good witch, has recently been murdered, leaving her estate to you. It's now up to the player to finish her work and solve the mystery of her death. This game is very dark, literally, so much so that it becomes a little difficult to read at times, but it's really solid. There's almost no music, but it does a great job of setting a mood through these thorough text descriptions. Pretty much everything of note in the game can be inspected, as well as interacted with in a number of ways. The verb bank at the top is pretty intuitive, and the puzzles are surprisingly not as frustrating as the genre is infamous for. I think its biggest strength really is in the text. Maybe this is just a me thing, but I can find games with a lot of voice acting a bit exhausting. I usually finish reading a sentence or paragraph well before the voiceover does. Just being able to go through the information at my own pace and filling in my own voice while reading gets me more involved in the story. Combined with the near total silence and last half of Darkness is highly engrossing, enough to make moments like this cause me to jump in my chair. Lahad was developed by the one-man team of William R. Fisher III, most known for his self-named developer-publisher WRF Games. He's continued to produce games throughout the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, his most recent release being 2020's Bloodlust Nemesis, the second entry in an original dungeon crawling series. In a 2008 interview with Adventure Classic Gaming, Fisher gave some retrospective thoughts on his first foray into the industry. Looking back, what might you have done differently from conceptualization to distribution when you were developing your games? I would have liked to have been the first to invent the SMART cursor and got rid of the open, examine, go, etc. commands, and added more mechanical puzzle-type games. Possibly more characters with dialogue trees too. When asked about his inspirations, he cites one name in particular: Uninvited. I was gonna have to talk about this one eventually. Yep, this is where my skull comes from. After playing 1986's Uninvited, the similarities with Fisher's debut are pretty obvious. They share a similar setup of venturing into a haunted house. They both feature near identical UIs, commands, and even a window for easy access to each screen's different exits. Uninvited is an intriguing game, definitely the kind of thing that would set someone's mind on fire at the time, for better and worse. You and your brother are driving on a lonely road one night when a strange figure appears in front of your car. You veer off and crash, and when you come to, your brother is nowhere to be found. Towering before you is a mansion filled with mazes, traps, secrets, and ghouls. There's a lot of really cool things about this game, and some things that I find really annoying. I'll start with the negatives, like 1. The cursor lies to you. You actually need it a little to the right to properly click something. This leads to moments of frustration, especially when wasting a single click will result in your death. Speaking of, the game relies on a lot of trial and error to find out what will make you instantly die. Very little of this is telegraphed, and you will probably get got by this skeleton lady several times before you realize that you need to open your bottle of ghost repellent before using it. Of course, my mistake. There's some random jump scares every now and again. Now that's not inherently terrible, and it does occur after a certain amount of turns, but there is a ticking clock element in the background you need to be aware of. The finicky cursor combined with the inventory system doesn't play well. I like the idea of a window opening up to represent a container, then dragging an item to yourself, but the container's always open in a spot right above your inventory box, and there's no way to move it. You end up dragging items to the edge of your inventory and having to rearrange them to avoid clutter from how many you'll be picking up. Oh, and I don't know if this is a problem exclusive to the DOS version of this game, but you cannot type. Like when I try to save, I can't because it will not take my keystrokes. It's really weird and makes the unforgiving deaths a lot more obnoxious. I'm willing to save scum through a game, just let me save. This also ended up soft locking me after beating the first part of the mansion. You need to speak some words of power to this doll, but I can't do so for the above reasons. So my playthrough just kind of ended here. Why didn't I just jump over to one of the many other ports of this game? Well, that gets into my positives. Number 1, I love the way this game looks. You might have guessed by now, but I have a real fondness for DOS 4-color CGA graphics, and Uninvited might very well be the pinnacle of them. Even looking at screenshots of the other versions, they just don't have the same atmosphere as the DOS one. CGA was technically capable of 3 different palettes of 4 colors each, but many game makers went with the black, white, magenta, and cyan one because of the high level of contrast. This game makes such good use of it. It's so cool. Primitive, but otherworldly, kind of like those German expressionist films from the 20s where they'd slap a color filter over the screen. To reiterate, I do like the inventory and verb system here. Maybe it's just that I like the ideas more than the execution, as there's a few too many user experience things holding it back from being a truly accessible classic. A crew of over 10 people worked on this, quite a large team at the time, and most of them were also responsible for Shadowgate, an extremely popular and influential title in the adventure genre 1 year later. Uninvited has a lot of nifty things, a cool atmosphere, detailed setting, and I can't stress enough how great this game looks. There's a reason it's all over my channel's branding. Just consider bringing a walkthrough if you plan on giving it a go. We've gone back to the late 80s, but I think we can stretch it further. In fact, I think we can go back to 1982, where Uninvited was an achievement in horror graphics. Transylvania was the founder. What horror games existed at this time were pretty much all adventure games, text-based, and adaptations of Dracula. Antonio Antiochia was only just entering high school when he discovered a little game at a computer lab called Adventure. He was instantly hooked on the idea of playing through a virtual world, and as soon as his dad relented, he received a computer and set to work making his own games. At the time, his mother had recently passed from cancer, and gaming was an escape in more ways than one. Not only could he plant himself into these stories, he was now able to make his own, a creative outlet and a social one, as he showed off his first projects to his friends. Antiochia's father encouraged him in his newfound passion, and got into ordering computer parts from a company owned by one Mark Pelcharski. During a conversation over the phone, Antiochia's father mentioned his son's ongoing project, what was at the time a purely text adventure game called Transylvania. Pelcharski was curious and asked for a copy to be sent over. He was so impressed with the game that he wanted to publish it under his new company, Penguin Games, and even offered Antiochia access to a yet-to-be-released graphics program to add visuals to the game. The artistic process would take an additional 9 months, longer than he'd spent actually programming the game, but it paid off. Transylvania is not only one of the most impressive-looking games of the time, it set the bar for what was now expected of adventure games. Using a new technique where each asset was quickly drawn in layers, it managed to load graphics faster and in higher quality than ever before. In Transylvania, players are tasked with rescuing the Princess Sabrina from a vampire's castle. The woods outside are stalked by a vicious werewolf whose behavior is random, and the game is slathered in love for campy horror and science fiction. There's this goofy goblin you need to scare off with a secret word, wizards teleporting in from Wizard Fest, and even aliens. While there is a time limit, it's quite forgiving, and the puzzles don't have the same moon logic solutions as others in the genre. As long as the player pays attention, almost everything can be figured out, although there is a puzzle that requires you to have a letter that was included in the box, revealing a solution you'd have no other way of knowing. Transylvania is a charming game, with a surprising level of open-endedness. There are some optional puzzles like finding a gun and silver bullet to kill the werewolf, and finding an underground cavern that reveals the secret to contacting the aliens, but they can both be skipped as long as you're willing to hop back and forth between scenes to shake that pesky wolf off. Antiochia would go on to write, program, and illustrate 2 more games in the Transylvania series, but seemingly stopped producing games after completing his trilogy. While it's a shame we didn't get more games from him, Jimmy Mayer's blog, The Digital Antiquarian, shares some details about the simple pleasures of creating Antiochia would find. Quote, "Sometime after Transylvania's release, and as Antonio was going through the surreal experience of coming home from school to find royalty checks for thousands of dollars in his mailbox, Penguin received a rather unusual package that came from an entire grade school class in Australia. Its ostensible purpose was to ask for a hint book, but each kid in the class also contributed a crayon drawing inspired by the game. Antonio has kept and cherished the package to this day. Quote, "When I go through sad or frustrating times, I'll sometimes read through those old letters to cheer myself up." I hope you enjoyed this look at retro horror, the good and the bad. If you've played any of these, let me know what you think, and if there's any you think I should have talked about, let me know in the comments below.